Gear this week, two bestsellers from Fiat and Rover get major facelifts. One of the perils of buying second-hand that we thought had gone away. And we learn from the master how to cope with four-wheel drive and four-wheel steering on the gravel. Hello and welcome to this week's Top Gear. We're in the green heart of England at Stratford-on-Avon, which has been chosen as the meeting point for the 170 or so magnificent machines, not to mention the men who are flying or driving them, taking part in the Diamond Jubilee Rally to celebrate 60 years of the Veteran Car Club. They've come from all points of the compass, an immense variety, well over 50 marques are represented. We should be looking at some of the most interesting of them as the programme goes on this evening. Now, this delightful little number was built in France in 1913. It's called the Unique, and as the name implies, it was intended to be a single model. But its creator, Georges Ricard, went on building derivatives for the next 26 years. Now, leaving aside the huge differences in scale, exactly the same sorts of problems are faced by the big international car makers these days. And that's where we start this evening. How do you breathe new life into a car that's been around for, say, 10 years without going to the possibly bankrupting cost of building a completely new model? Chris Goff has been looking at two of the most popular small cars on the market that have both been revitalised.
10 years ago, Metro was launched as the make or break car for BL. But today, with it consistently at number 4 or 5 in the British top 10 bestsellers, there's a more relaxed and confident feel to the launch of a new Rover Metro. But this is no cosmetic facelift. There are significant changes to one of Britain's favourite cars. One thing the old Metro was always crying out for was a new engine. Of course, the old A series was a faithful unit, but it first saw light of day in 1949, the original A40. It was getting a bit tired. Now, this is the K series, already winning international acclaim for its performance, its economy and its flexibility. You've already seen it in the 400 Rover. Here it is installed in the Metro engine bay, and of course the Peugeot 5-speed gearbox on the end of the engine instead of the gears in the sump, as in the old Mini and Metro system. They've done a very good job with the redesign of the interior of the new Metro. They've used very nice materials and fabrics. It's exceptionally well trimmed, and the redesigned dashboard and fascia looks very good indeed. It stems from the Rover philosophy of putting luxury car standards in small cars. At the rear, a restyled tailgate, nice new rear lamp clusters, and just as much boot space as you've got in the original Metro. They've broadened the Metro range with 12 models and 3 engines. This is the 1.1-litre 60 brake horsepower carburettor unit. There's a 1.4-litre 8-valve 76 brake horsepower carburettor version, and then the top of the range 16-valve 1.4-litre fuel-injected engine, which develops 95 brake horsepower. One of the major changes in the new Metro is to the seating position. Although you still sit very low in the car and these sills are quite obtrusive, it means that you're in line with the pedals and the steering wheel angle is right. It's a very comfortable driving position, and it puts right everything that was wrong with the old car. K-Series engine is very smooth and unobtrusive. I like the gear change in the new 5-speed gearbox in this 1.1S, and altogether it's a much more civilized and sophisticated way of making progress than the old Metro. The car always had a rather harsh, choppy ride, but in this one they developed a new suspension system which interconnects the front and rear units. The result is a great success. The car's ride is transformed. It feels like a much bigger car. It soaks up bumps really well, and yet it doesn't allow float or roll. And in urban conditions, it hasn't sacrificed the steering accuracy or the handiness that the Metro has always enjoyed. Of course, the engineers are still constrained by the basic dimensions of the vehicle. There's not so much room, especially in the back, as some rivals. And why has it taken 10 years to put all these improvements into production? So the Metro 1.1S scores on its new engine, its nice 5-speed gearbox, excellent ride and handling, the interior trim and that new seating position. Against it, well, the high sills make it awkward to get in and out, and the fuel tank's still too small, limiting the range, although they moved the filler cap up to a better position. And it's fiddly to remove the rear shelf and fold up the seats. Fiat's 127 was almost the definitive Super Mini. In 1982 it was replaced by the Uno, which rapidly became one of Europe's best-selling small cars. They've sold over 4 million examples. Well, now Uno's had a facelift, but like the new Metro, the changes are far more than just skin deep. The car comes with 7 different power units, including a diesel. 3 of them are derived from its big brother, the Tipo, as are the gearboxes. And there's also the option of the Selector automatic transmission. There's no automatic Metro yet. Only the shell and doors remain of the original Uno. All the other panels are new, designed by the same people who did the Tipo. Under the bonnet, great attention has been paid to cutting engine noise with special engine mounting blocks and sound absorbing panels. It's now got the best aerodynamics in its class. Inside, they've revised the dashboard, and the heating and ventilation system is changed with automatic temperature control on some models, and that's a first for a small car. The new tailgate gives more usable boot room, the shelf is mounted higher, and with the seats folded, there's 34 cubic feet available for big loads. Now, when you first start to drive the new Uno, you think they've done something to the suspension to improve the ride, but in fact it's exactly the same as the old model. What they have done is eliminate all the shakes and rattles of the old car coming from the seats and the dashboard and the fascia panel. It's all mounted in rubber, and it's all strapped down very tight. The result is the car feels and rides like a more expensive, heavier model. Uno has always had a good name for its handling and the lightness of its controls, making it an easy car to drive. But performance remains a major attraction. It's got a very Italian snarl through the gears. However, on our test car, the gear change could be quite awkward. The new car loses those odd paddle-type switches around the binnacle, and the controls are now on stalks, but it's difficult to find the shorter indicator lever until you're used to it. But overall, it remains a clean-cut, appealing package. So on the Uno 60, we like the space inside the car, the excellent handling, and the use of galvanised steel panels on the exterior. There's very good access to the engine. We didn't like that rather bulky gear change, and on the subject of gears, you can't easily pull on the handbrake with reverse gear engaged. The pedal position is slightly odd, and there's no central locking on this model.
Well, it looks as if the changes to both those cars should give them several more years of life in an increasingly competitive sector of the market. The future undoubtedly lies with smaller cars. That brings us to the subject of buying cars. And the plain fact is that outside the fleet market, most of us don't buy new cars at all. We enter what has been accurately called the jungle of the second-hand car market, poring over the ads, traipsing across dealers' forecourts, hoping to find a bargain without being conned. A process that all too often can end in tears, particularly for the unwary. As Jeremy Clarkson explains.
Go, lummy, stone the crow, strike a light. Have you come to see me on the right day? I've got a couple of very tasty motors here. Now, I know they look like Fords, but this is craftsmanship. Bugatti Blue, unique. All the trimmings, low mileage. Want to take the pick? I'll go get the keys.
Which one would you choose? These two cars are virtually identical. They're the same colour, each had one owner, they're in good condition, and both have a low mileage. Or do they? Both cars have 15,000 miles on the clock, but this one has really done 35,000 miles and has been clocked by Jack the Lad here. He pockets an extra £700 on top of the dealer's normal profit. And the cost is a staggering £100 million a year, with an estimate of 1 in 5 cars being clocked at some time in its life. Ronald Allen, a post office worker from Birmingham, bought this Maestro from a private seller.
I bought this car in September '88, and there was 27,000 miles on the clock. And the chap that I bought from assured me it was the genuine mileage. And when I got home, I was a little bit suspicious about the wear on the pedals and oil on the engine block underneath. So I contacted the original owner, who assured me it had done 82,000 miles, and they'd sold it to the local auction in Stoke-on-Trent.
Most profit for the con men comes from cars less than 3 years old with a high mileage, fleet cars and ex-hire cars. Most are sold through reputable auction houses such as ADT, but the problem starts after the sale. Our bent dealer, using a fictitious name and address, buys for cash, clocks the car, and sells for a profit at a less reputable auction house, again using a different name. This could go on for several changes, making it almost impossible to prove who actually clocked the car. Details of all vehicles sold by ADT are put onto a computer that shows if a vehicle has been sold before with a higher mileage. But what else can be done?
If it was practically possible, any form of log or certificate which would record the odometer reading every time a vehicle changes hands, then that would be welcomed by the whole industry. Nobody wants clockers.
To make life less easy for the con men, more expensive cars, Jaguars, BMWs and so on, are now being fitted with tamper-proof instrument clusters. Lucas has developed an electronic odometer for the XJ6. Now this is a brand new car, so it's only showing 10 miles.
This device is capable of being programmed with its own serial number, date of manufacture, vehicle identification number, mileage, and any other functions that would, when plugged into the main agent's computer, reveal the history of the vehicle. Even if the unit is replaced altogether, it is programmed to show that it is not original equipment. As well as having a memory, the unit cannot be made to run backwards, nor is it any good to go forwards, as the numbers will not go past all the 9s.
There's no question that it is an expensive system at the moment. It's going to be quite some time before you find technology like that in a Ford Escort.
Technology aside, most of the pressure to curb clocking has come from consumer organisations, but they recognise they haven't stopped the problem and are having to work out systems that can be applied within the existing law.
Voices is a computerised mileage checking system, and it consists of officers visiting auctions and garage forecourts and entering vehicle details into one of these devices. The information is then passed to our central computer, which speaks to the DVLC computer at Swansea. And in the case of low mileage vehicles, we'll find out who the previous keeper of the vehicle was. We'll write to them, ask them what the mileage was when they sold the vehicle. And if it's higher than we see it at the forecourt, it implies the vehicle's been clocked, and we can investigate the matter accordingly.
The plain fact is that despite all the effort, clocking hasn't gone away. Last year, the Office of Fair Trading obtained 379 convictions for misrepresenting a vehicle's true mileage.
And that's only the tip of an iceberg. Now, you'd think there'd be something that could be done to stop the public from being fleeced, and there is. Or rather, there was, but the government has kicked them out, arguing they're too bureaucratic.
Actually, it couldn't have been simpler. It was proposed that mileages be recorded by owners on registration documents when taxing or selling their vehicles. Not only would a buyer be able to see at a glance the true mileage, but the DVLC at Swansea would also have the vehicle's mileage record. With the government so adamant, the only hope for the moment lies with a private member's bill currently going through the House of Lords. It has the backing of consumer groups and the industry. Now, with such a head of steam, perhaps the government will take another look at this apparently simple solution to the problem.
And that brings us to the Diamond Jubilee Rally. It's much more than just a huge nostalgic binge. It's a real old-fashioned rally. It takes place over a period of a week. The cars have to navigate around a set course. They have to negotiate some pretty tricky hills. Some of them will cover as many as 400 or 500 miles. Now, during that time, of course, at 14 miles an hour, you get to see an awful lot of countryside. The rally pulled in an extraordinary range of veteran and vintage cars, from 1884 de Dion Bouton to some big 1930 Bentleys. Veteran cars are now generally taken to include the Edwardian era, up until the end of 1918, whereas vintage cars fall between 1919, the end of the Great War, and 1930. Pulling power was tested to the limit on this twisting, hilly stretch. Some managed it with a push or two and a touch of encouragement. Others made it look quite easy. This 1901 Locomobile steamer didn't have quite the urge to carry the passenger. The very successful partnership of Panhard and Levasseur produced this 1891 wagonette, the very first petrol engine car. You need to get up early for work though. The hot tube ignition system takes a little time to get started. Perhaps this is more to your taste, the Baker electric car, built in Ohio in 1902. Fairly purrs along as sweetly as a sewing machine. This is a locomobile from 1901, a man-about-town steam-powered buggy. In fact, it burns about 7.5 pints of water to the mile and generates 5.5 brake horsepower in the process. Built in America and Connecticut, in fact 400 of them were imported into the UK in 1900. Splendid combination, you might say, of wood and steel. This little tri-car is the oldest surviving Lagonda, bought for 7 and 6 in 1937. The one thing that unites all these cars is the amount of dedication and tender loving care that people pour into preserving these bits of our engineering heritage. There's no doubt it's rather like having a second wife. No wonder they call it the Diamond Jubilee. Well, this might be a rally, but there's still time for an unscheduled stop in the Warwickshire countryside and a chat, no doubt about what's happening under the bonnet. This event will be remembered for many a long year as a great occasion that brought together people from all over the world to share their common interest in some uncommonly fine cars. Now, this lovely Mercedes from 1907 has only got 4 cylinders, but each one is almost 2 litres in capacity. It's so low revving, you can just about hear the valves open and close. And of course, like most cars, ever since this Finnish machine was invented, it runs on petrol. Vehicles now consume almost 30% of all the oil that's used in the world. And of course, for many years now, they've been under attack for the tremendous amount of pollution that's chucked out of the back end. There are really only 2 lines of attack on that. One is alternative to petrol and diesel, the other is radically cleaner and more efficient engines. Tom Boswell's been looking at just such an engine.
Pollution from cars, of course, is at its worst in heavy city traffic like this. Not just because you've got lots of cars all in one place, but also because at slow speeds the car engine is at its least efficient. On motorways at higher speeds it works much more efficiently. Of course, you can control the pollution by fitting a catalytic converter, such as the ones fitted as standard to all new Audis, but there's a high price to pay. It normally costs around £300 extra to fit a catalytic converter system, and as well, the car is going to use about 10% extra fuel. And more fuel means more carbon dioxide, and hence more global warming. Suppose we could make a much better engine, one that produces so little pollution that we could throw away the catalytic converter, and yet it produces high power output with good fuel efficiency, even round town and in traffic jams, maybe up to 10 times better while it was ticking over. Well, that's the claim made for a revolutionary engine designed here at the Coventry Polytechnic by Dr. Dan Merritt. This is the prototype engine under test in the laboratory. At first sight, it looks much like any other engine, similar size, shape and output, but it's claimed to halve average fuel consumption and hence produce half the carbon dioxide of a conventional petrol engine. How? Well, first we need to look at how a conventional engine works. In a 4-stroke engine, the petrol-air mixture is drawn into the cylinder and then compressed. Problem number 1 is we have to keep the compression ratio low to stop the mixture exploding, and that lowers efficiency. Of course, we must have a spark plug to start the burning at the chosen point, so it then spreads through the mixture. If we want less power, we block off the air intake or throttle it, and that makes it harder to suck air in, causing pumping losses and lower efficiency. That's necessary, as if you allow in the full amount of air, an ordinary spark wouldn't fire such a weak mixture. We can do better than that with a diesel engine. In a diesel, we throw away the spark plug and the throttle and keep the fuel away from the air during the compression stroke in a process called segregation. As we compress air only, we can now have a high compression ratio and thus higher efficiency, but there's a price to pay. We get noise, diesel knock. We get slow combustion and hence often a lot of smoke, and the engine is much heavier. What Dan Merritt and his colleagues have done is to combine the virtues of both petrol and diesel engines and eliminate most of the drawbacks. The main change from a normal engine is this small cylinder here. It has no valves of its own, but is connected to the main big cylinder. During the induction stroke, air comes in through the intake manifold through no throttle, so there are no pumping losses. As the main piston's moving down and drawing in air, fuel is injected into the little cylinder. Now, during the compression stroke, you're compressing pure air, so there's no chance of pre-ignition. You can run at a very high compression ratio and hence get very good efficiency. So far, so good, but perhaps it sounds a bit like a complicated diesel. The trick, though, is in the combustion. That takes place in the intermediate combustion chamber here. There's no spark plug, but the burning is started by the catalyst round the outside of the chamber. Platinum is used, just like in a normal catalytic converter on a car, but only about a quarter of the amount is needed. The actual combustion chamber looks like this, and the engineers claim that by clever design, the combustion is very, very quick and produces very little pollution. But the big advantage is the way the fuel and this little bit of air here are kept segregated from the main charge of air in the big cylinder. That means that under town conditions or traffic jams, when the engine is running under part load, the small amount of fuel that's necessary can still be burnt efficiently while being kept separate from the main charge of air. That means lower idling RPM, perhaps as low as 200, and very low fuel consumption. If the engine were fitted in a Vauxhall Astra, for instance, they reckon it would give 100 miles to the gallon at 40 miles an hour and a 60% saving on the urban cycle, with no carbon monoxide, no unburnt hydrocarbons, and very low nitrogen oxides. In production versions, the engineers hope to use this advanced two-stroke design. It combines the two cylinders using a single stepped piston with a combustion chamber incorporated under the piston crown. If it can be made to work, it would offer even greater efficiency with fewer moving parts. Can we believe it? Well, Dr. Merritt has just returned from the States, where he reports great interest, particularly from the three major car manufacturers, but perhaps more significant, also from the clean air watchdogs of California. All he needs now is a couple of £1 million to take the experiments to the next stage and actually put an engine in a car.
Well, we'll try to keep our eye on that development. The car industry doesn't have the best record in the world for fostering radically new ideas. Let's turn now to motorsport, something, of course, cars have been involved in ever since they could move faster than a walking man. When Mitsubishi put their big four-wheel drive, four-wheel steering saloon, the Galant, to the ultimate test of rallying, it was poo-pooed as being something of a gimmick. It proved to be a very tough competitor indeed. Despite a horrendous roll, Harry Vatanen came fifth in last year's Lombard RAC Rally. Now, Tiffany Dell hoped for a rather less dramatic ride when he was having a lesson in the art of rallying in the sister car that actually won last year's event.
Well, that's what happens when you get things a little bit wrong in rallying. Today we're going to show you how to do it right, and I'm under strict orders not to bend this rally car. Well, I'm not going to show you how it's done, but last year's Lombard RAC Rally winner Pentti Rickla, he's going to show us. Soon after we set off and headed for a tight right-hander, Pentti swung the car hard left. A bit odd, I thought.
Yeah, it's called Scandinavian flick. I do the same here. I turn right first and then left.
So, you turn right for a left-hander there, powering out. I see you've got your left foot on the brake all the time, changing gear as well.
Well, you can do with this sort of gearbox. It's designed that you can have your left foot all the time with a brake pedal, and you only use the clutch when you change the gears up, because it's a quicker that way to do it.
Now we're heading up to the forest section now. All the World Championship rallies are going to be pace notes, so you will know what's around the corner. Oh! Almost into the forest, literally.
That was a Scandinavian flick overdoing.
So will pace notes actually change driving styles?
No, not really, but a little bit of driving lines are more sort of like racing lines. So I know you are more used to.
I mean, I've done a bit of driving. I did the rally school in a rear-wheel drive Escort, so is that going to be any use with a four-wheel drive?
Four-wheel drive cars are nearer the front-wheel drive cars. For example, if you get very sideways, you put more power on.
honest, I'm not used to this changing gear without the clutch. Tremendous, the gearbox takes it. Well, OK, Penty, I've seen how you do it. I think time for you to stop and let me have a go.
Well, if you have to, I'm quite bad passenger, but let's see how it happens.
He might be a bad passenger, but he hadn't shown much concern for my nerves as we brushed the woodwork at 80 miles an hour.
Well, Penty, that seemed incredibly quick to me through those trees. If there's, I'm going to have a go now. If there's one thing I'm going to concentrate on, what should it be?
Well, I guess it is the wheel between your hands which should concentrate. Get that right.
OK, that's lesson number one. Let's try it.
The steering wheel, indeed. That was the last of my worries as I stepped into the thoroughbred rally car with four-wheel drive and four-wheel steering, and then fired up the 300 horsepower turbocharged engine. As we headed for the woods, my only worry was whether my technique was going to be up to it.
So this just a normal right, just to get the feel of it. Second gear, third gear. Now try this Scandinavian on the left, turn right, then turn left. Whoops. I think I'm being vicious enough with it. So flick right and round.
Very good.
Power.
Carry on. Oh, fantastic. Super. Very good.
And I'm going into that field again. On the power. And you can feel how good the traction is in the four-wheel drive. Now we come to the wooded bits where I'm going to be a lot more cautious.
Please.
And there, if you don't attack the corner, you can feel the understeer much stronger. Second gear. And it's really the traction that is so good in four-wheel drive that you can get the grip. Very tight through the trees, ease in the power, but then again superb traction. That's really where, compared with the old two-wheel drive, this car is so good because you've simply got so much traction once the car's straight. And it's nice now to get out in the open, but I'll try a bit of a flick one and the other, and then on the power, and
too much power. Even full opposite lock wasn't enough to stop the car spinning.
Well, I'm not sure that's the right way to do it, Penty. I think that's a bit slow that way, don't you?
It's very entertaining anyhow.
I'll try and do another lap without many mistakes, but
If we must. We will have automatic gearbox next time.
Okay, so I crunched a couple of gears, but I was enjoying the four-wheel drive and getting into the swing of turning left before right, while trying to ignore the ever-present trees.
feeding the power on. Very conscious, this isn't my car. There's a tree right here on the edge of the road. Well, Penty, what do you think of my driving?
Well, Tiff, I think you ought to stay in a motor racing, Group C or whatever you are good at.
Oh dear, that bad? We're going to have a beer then.
And no drinking and driving.
Well, on that showing, I would say that crack rally drivers don't make very good passengers, certainly not in their own cars. That's really all this week from Stratford, indeed all for the spring series. We're back in the autumn around Motor Show time. See you then. Till then, drive safely.